The sun was merciless that afternoon, hanging high over Dust Creek, its heat pressing down on every wooden plank, every soul that gathered in the small town square. The crowd buzzed with excitement, laughter, and the cruel thrill of spectacle. Dust Creek hadn't had much entertainment since the last hanging, and now they were about to witness something the town hadn't seen before: a human auction. Not of a criminal, not of an outlaw, but of a young woman whose only crime was being in the wrong place when life turned cruel. Her name was Clara Hayes. She was no outlaw, no thief, just a farmer's daughter who had lost everything when her family's homestead burned to ash, and debt came knocking at her door. Her father had died trying to save the horses. Her mother fell ill soon after, and with no money, no kin, and no mercy left in the world, Clara was sold into servitude by the sheriff's decree. They said it was justice, but everyone knew it was nothing more than humiliation in disguise. She stood on the wooden platform, her white dress now dulled by dust, wrists chained in front of her. The auctioneer's voice echoed through the air, booming and theatrical. "Now, folks, here's a fine young woman, strong, obedient, and quiet. Let's start the bidding at $10. The crowd erupted in laughter. A rancher shouted, $10? For her? You'd have to pay me." The laughter rolled through the crowd again, cruel and heartless. Clara's eyes darted across the faces, searching for even 1 ounce of pity. But she found none. Tears burned in her eyes, but she refused to cry. Not here, not in front of them. The auctioneer slammed his gavel. "All right then, let's start lower. $5. Another man yelled, "She ain't worth that either," and tossed a coin toward her feet. The metallic clink hit the wooden floor like an insult. The laughter grew louder. $1 then. The auctioneer barked, desperate to make the sale. "Do I hear one?" Silence. Clara lowered her head, her dignity crumbling like dry sand, slipping between her fingers. The world blurred as the sun glared in her eyes, and all she could hear was the mocking laughter of men who never knew compassion. 50 cents, a drunk miner shouted, slapping his knee in amusement. "Sold for $half. The auctioneer laughed nervously, glancing around for approval. The people cheered, more for the cruelty of it than the transaction itself. And then it happened. From the back of the crowd came the sound of boots striking dirt, steady and unhurried. The laughter began to fade as heads turned. A tall cowboy stepped forward, his hat casting a long shadow over his eyes. He didn't rush, didn't speak, just walked with a calm authority that silenced the air. The crowd watched as he approached the platform, dust swirling around his boots. He was the kind of man the West respected, the quiet type whose strength didn't need words. He reached into his coat pocket, drew out a handful of gold coins, and let them drop onto the wooden table with a sound that made every head turn. The auctioneer blinked, confused. Sir, the bidding was already—" The cowboy cut him off with a low, steady voice. "Not anymore. I'm buying her out." The crowd gasped. The sheriff frowned from the edge of the platform. "That's not how it works." "Cowboy." The man's eyes rose under the brim of his hat, cold as steel. "It does now." He placed another gold coin down, the weight of it ending all arguments. The sheriff hesitated, then nodded slightly. The cowboy looked at Clara. "You don't belong in chains." For the first time that day she lifted her head. Their eyes met, hers trembling with disbelief, his unwavering and calm. The crowd murmured, confused, some angry, some curious. The cowboy stepped closer, unlocked the shackles from her wrists with the key taken from the auctioneer's trembling hand, and draped his coat around her shoulders. Then, without another word, he turned and led her away from the jeering crowd. Nobody dared to stop him. The sound of his boots faded into the distance, and all that remained was stunned silence. The same people who had laughed moments before now stood in awe, watching the stranger and the girl disappear down the dusty road. That night, in the quiet of the hills beyond town, Clara sat by a small campfire, the heavy coat still wrapped around her. "Why did you do it?" she asked softly. The cowboy looked into the flames. "Because I know what it's like to have a crowd. Decide what you're worth." His tone carried the weight of old wounds. She nodded, tears finally breaking free. Not from shame this time, but from gratitude. The stars stretched endless above them, and for the first time in a long time, Clara felt like maybe her story wasn't over. Maybe it had just begun. The next morning, Clara awoke to the smell of coffee and the warmth of sunlight. Creeping through the pines, the cowboy was already saddling his horse, his movements precise and quiet. "You're awake," he said, not looking up. "We've got a long ride ahead." Clara stood, brushing dust from her dress. "Where are we going?" He adjusted his saddle strap. "Someplace that doesn't treat people like property." She frowned slightly. "You mean—" "Another town." He shook his head. "No, a new life." They rode through the canyon, the air cool and dry, the sound of hooves echoing against the red stone. Clara watched the landscape roll by, every mile taking her further from the chains of Dust Creek. "You never told me your name," she said, after a long silence. The cowboy smiled faintly. "Name's Wyatt. Wyatt." "Cole!" The name carried a weight she couldn't quite place, like a legend whispered in saloons. She realized then that this was no ordinary man. Stories had been told about him: the rancher who once saved a town from bandits, the drifter who fought for the voiceless. Maybe those were just tales, but sitting beside him, Clara believed every word. As they rode, word began to spread through the frontier. People whispered about the cowboy who'd bought a woman's freedom with gold. Some said he was mad, others called him a hero. But Dust Creek was not a place that forgave humiliation easily. Back in town, Sheriff Dalton gathered his men, anger burning in his eyes. "That man made a fool of us," he growled. "Find him." Within days, a posse was on their trail. Wyatt knew they were being followed. He told Clara nothing, but his eyes scanned the horizon more often, his hand resting near his revolver. One night, as they camped by a river, she asked, "They'll come for you, won't they?" He nodded. "They might, but I've faced worse." She looked into the fire, her voice breaking. "You shouldn't have done it. You risked your life for someone who had nothing left." Wyatt looked at her with a quiet conviction. "You were never nothing. Clara, you were just surrounded by people who forgot what worth means." When the posse finally found them at dawn, the gunfire echoed across the canyon. Wyatt fought like a man who'd faced death before and didn't fear it. Clara hid behind the rocks, praying, trembling, watching courage take form before her eyes. When the dust settled, only Wyatt remained standing. His arm was bleeding, his face hard but calm. He turned to her with a weary smile. "Looks like we're free again." She rushed to him, tears streaking down her face. "You didn't have to save me twice." He chuckled softly, pain in his voice. "Guess it's becoming a habit." Days later, they reached the borderlands, a place beyond the law's reach, where the sun dipped behind the hills like a promise of peace. Wyatt built a small cabin by the creek, and together they began anew. Clara tended the garden, while Wyatt mended fences and taught her to ride. Each sunset they'd sit by the porch, silent but content. The scars of their pasts remained, but they no longer defined them.